I'm going to talk to you today about a project we're doing at Vision Critical, which we've called the Built for Speed project, and a book that I produced called The Quick and the Dead, because it's my contention that it's not about quality and cost and speed. It's actually, at the moment, right now, mostly about speed. And I'm going to run through that with 2 or 3 examples as we go through. Now, first of all, just looking at speed for a moment. Speed changes over time, what we mean by it and how it works. When steam trains came in, speed changed fundamentally. All of a sudden, we could travel at 80 miles an hour, at best case anyway. Time as we know it today suddenly mattered. It used to be that the time in Manchester and the time in London and the time in Bristol was different. Noon was when the sun was dead overhead. However, that wouldn't work with train timetables, so we had to change time and have an integrated time. So now we just have a few time slices around the world. All of a sudden, people had to have clocks. They had to get to work for a particular time because of the nature of change in speed as we knew it. Another way that speed has changed, Samuel's Morse and the Morse code. All of a sudden, messages could travel faster than people. They could travel faster than those steam trains. We had to change the way that we do business. We had to think about things in a different way, fundamentally different. So again, society changed. And then we get an interesting one here, the Concorde, because this was the high watermark of when we thought moving people was what speed was about. For a short time, from 1976 to 2003, passengers on commercial airlines could travel at more than twice the speed of sound. And that was really important and really interesting, and we saw things changing. But actually, all of those have become out of date now. Because what we see now is that speed today means things like Facebook and Twitter. You've only got to look at the phenomenal speed that truth, lie, innuendo, rumor, insight go through the Twitter sphere. It's really changing the way that people expect to get answers. Think about Wikipedia. Think about the business people that we work with market research. When they get certain types of questions, they Google it, or they go to Wikipedia, and they get an answer straight away. Somebody dies somewhere in the world, some pop star you've never heard of, or an actor you've never heard of. By the time you hear it on the news, you go to Wikipedia, the story is already there. People expect much faster information. They expect things to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We all know the phenomenon of the crackberry, where I was at a conference just the other day. I said, put your hands up if you turn your mobile phone off at night. 2 people in the room put up their hands. Everybody else kept their phone turned on at night. As the plane comes into land, everybody's reaching into their bags and they're taking out the phone, ready to turn it on. We expect to be connected. That is fundamentally different. When I started working in market research, people sent you a letter saying they would like to have a meeting to discuss a project. It's a different sort of speed today. And I think it's best epitomized by this sort of device, print on demand. So you want a book? Well, we will print you a copy. You don't have to wait for Amazon to deliver it on their high-speed service. So next morning, you can stand there, press a button, and it will print and bind and cut and churn out at the other end a book on demand. And that's the sort of speed context that we're living in. When we talk to business executives, they say that one of the reasons they don't use market research is because they believe it's going to be too slow. We're not getting into the C-suite because we are simply judged without even making our case that we're going to be too slow. So we started a project looking at what we can learn from elsewhere. And I've got 1 or 2 examples here, and the book, which you can download from the website, has got lots more examples. But this is Bradley Wiggins. And for those of you who don't follow cycling, the turnaround has been phenomenal. No Briton had ever won the Tour de France. Up until a few years ago, we didn't do that well at the Olympic cycling. We are now, they like to say, we're the China of cycling, where the people investing the big money, the big technology. We're doing really well. We scooped the medals. We got the maillot jaune, the yellow jersey, for first place in the Tour de France and the 3rd place. But let's look at what Bradley Wiggins is doing. They've got lots of straightforward things. They've got nutritionists, but they've got a director. The guy called David Brailsford, who's in charge of the whole thing, has created the director of marginal gains. Are there slightly better spokes on the wheel? Are there things we can do to the shape of the helmet? Are there things we can do to the shape of the gloves that will give us a marginal improvement that take us forward? And that's one of the things we need to think about in terms of our research program. Another great example comes from the northwest of England. In Liverpool, they were losing about 12 people a year, deaths in fire. And they decided in the fire authority that over the next 5 years, they were going to reduce this by 50%. They wanted to get down to an average of 6 a year. Obviously, they'd like it to be 0, but you've got to be practical as well. So how can we halve the death rate? And their initial thinking was we needed to get the fire engines out faster. How can we have faster alarm bells? How can we get them down the poles faster, into the engines faster? Can we clear the streets so they can travel faster? But when they did the analysis, they discovered that most of those people who were dead before the emergency phone call was made. No amount of speeding up, even if you could go at the speed of light from when the call was received to the fire, you still wouldn't change it. So they realized they were tackling the wrong problem. They had to redefine it as fire prevention. They knew that most of the fires happen in lower income households, in older households, in rented households. So they actually reduced the number of fire officers. They increased the amount of work they did on fire prevention training, information and education. And they hit their goal in 3.5 years rather than in 5 years by redefining the problem. That is massively important for market researchers. How do we redefine the problem so we don't just do the survey faster, we don't just do the field work and the scripting faster, we don't just do the analysis faster, but actually we come up with a fundamentally different way of delivering what we need to deliver. This is Sir Joseph Whitworth, and back in the 19th century, those steam trains that I was telling you about, those steam engines, they initially had a real problem. Every single blacksmith had his own tap and dies. You couldn't take the bolts and the nuts from one steam engine and put them into another. And what he invented was the Whitworth standard, which went on to become the British Imperial standard, which meant that you could take the nuts and the bolts. You got interchangeable options. Let's think about that in terms of market research. We need to know that if somebody comes up with a great app for gamification, we can slot it into our survey without spending time and problems. We need to know that if we've got all sorts of pieces of solutions that we can bolt them together, we're not going to have to spend time on the interface, that they will drive data through in sensible and coherent ways. Now, this is perhaps a little bit more surprising. This is a book by Carl Honoré called In Praise of Slow. So if we're trying to go faster, surely there's nothing slow can teach us. Well, actually, yes, there is. Think about the slow cooker. You put the meal on to cook before you go out to work. You come home, and within 2 or 3 minutes of coming home, you can have a hot, lovely tasting meal. So although it took all day for the meal to cook, it was fast for you. And that's the point we need to bear in mind about clients and users of market research. They don't actually care how long it takes. All they need to know is that going from their request to getting the answer is quick. The process itself doesn't have to be. Valet parking. It may take a valet ages to park your car when you draw up to those places. You don't really care, as long as when you come out, the car is waiting for you. How long the process takes behind the scenes is neither here nor there. Communities are very much like that. As a client, you're not too worried about how much work is going on in the background, the creation of this community. You just want to know that it's there to answer your questions when you have your questions. So this is the book that I talked about. There are 5 principles in it that I'm going to run through at incredible speed because that's the purpose of the topic. The Built for Speed concept, changing the process, preparation, being proactive, and devolving. And some of those are a little bit scary for researchers, really. The penny farthing is a really strange looking bicycle, isn't it? It achieved that shape for a very good reason. They were driving the marginal gains in the cycling process. They were getting as good as they could get. Why was the front wheel so big? Because there was no chain and there was no gearing. One time you sent the pedals round, the wheel went round one time. So if the wheel is twice as big, you're going to go twice as far. With a standard sized bicycle, you were limited to about 10 kilometers an hour, about 6 miles an hour. With the penny farthing, pedaling at the same number of revolutions per minute, you could do about 20 kilometers an hour, about 12 miles an hour. So it was all about speed. But that was the high watermark of going in that direction. Because what happened very quickly after that is we invented the chain, and now we have a built-for-speed bicycle today. It looks very different. It uses better technologies. It behaves in a very, very different way. And we need to, all the time in research, be thinking about, should we be trying to make the small gains and improvements, as we were doing with the penny farthing, or is there a breakthrough that's going to take us to the next place? We need to look at the process and change the process. And this is the classic market research process. We have a business need. That gets expressed as a desire. We design a study, we recruit respondents, and we deliver an answer. It is inherently a slow process. What we need to think about in the future is something in the middle. And for my company, that means a community. For somebody else, it might mean a customer feedback mechanism. For somebody else, it might mean a social media monitoring platform. But something that's in the middle that says we'll have ad hoc questions, we'll have benchmarks running all the time, we'll have profiling going on all the time, and actually we'll have generating of ideas. We won't just wait to see what comes up. Sometimes we will generate solutions before problems happen. It's one of the great things about social media monitoring. If you put that in the middle of the process, then you can see that going on. And that's great, and that really takes things forward. So we need to change the process. Now, what about preparation? Well, for those of us who've had gone through the process of either childbirth or partners in childbirth, and congratulations, Lenny, on your recent edition, we know that one of the things you do is you pack the bag the night before, the week before, in preparation. So many times in our own lives, we really do preparation well. What does that mean for market research? Well, for market research, it means recruiting people. That's one of the great benefits of online access panels. One of the reasons that online access panels were faster than previous research was because they used the internet. But the second was because they already had the people recruited. It wasn't fresh recruiting and fresh sampling. If we go towards communities, if we go towards customer feedback mechanisms where we've already established these things, if we go towards systems where we have social media monitoring already set up, then we have that preparation, we have a good structure, and we don't have to spend any time building when people come to us with a research problem. Okay. In the Matrix, the blue pill would have allowed Neo to stay within the fabricated reality. And the red pill is less safe, but it's a trip to the real world. And frankly, it's a trip to the real world that market researchers need. We have this fabricated idea that what people want is market research. Actually, nobody wants market research. They want to make better business decisions. If using market research helps, fine. But we need to get into that real world where we're talking to the CMOs, the CEOs, and the CFOs. In the perfect world, the world that I envisage in this built-for-speed model, yes, we would answer questions faster, but also we would go up to the boardroom and say, we know about a problem that you don't know about. You've not thought about this problem yet, but we have, and here is the solution. Now that's what I call speed. We've also got to get into the idea of devolving. So we could use something like SurveyMonkey as an example here, but I'd rather use Mercedes. In about 1906, 1907, somewhere around there, they did a bit of a study, a bit of a futuring exercise to decide how many cars would ever be needed. And they came to the conclusion that eventually the Western world would need 1 million cars because they thought there would never be more than 1 million chauffeurs. They didn't guess DIY driving. We need to look at the whole fuss about DIY and realize that in the future, people are going to expect to be able to use intelligent research tools to answer questions. Yes, giving them guidance from market research is great. Extra analysis from market research is great. But we cannot say it's going to be the job of a small tribe because that inherently means that we don't have the scalability. We can't be there all the time. Unless we want to work 24/7, we can't provide 24/7 answers. So we've got to be looking at the self-serve model for communities. We've got to be looking at really good templates for customer feedback and enterprise management systems to make sure we get right inside the DNA of companies. Okay, we get to the elevator pitch. The elevator pitch, it's got to be sharp, it's got to be snappy. The most important thing that we need to understand is that in today's world, right but late is useless. And when I look at so many of the briefs that we get in for research these days, it has to be delivered by next month. It has to be delivered by Friday. It has to be delivered by 2 o'clock today. That's the given. They then want to know what can we do with the cost and the quality to make sure it's good enough and it's cheap enough, but it's going to be there by that date. We need to absolutely focus on what the timeline is and then build the rest of the research solution around that. Let's not go back to somebody who says we need a solution for next week to say, well, that's the wrong question. We prefer to have 2 months. That's useless. We have to go through what people in other industries define as business process re-engineering. How can we change what we're doing to make it fundamentally different so we're delivering what clients need, what research users need, what the C-suite need when they need it? So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. I'd like to encourage you to visit the Vision Critical website and download the book. I'd like to encourage you to pay £40 and buy the book in blue as well. But I'll hand it over to Lenny for questions.